listening to Seminary Dropout, and I'm your host, Shane Blackshear. Somewhere in between seminary and youth camp, it's Seminary Dropout. Let's go. My guest today is Sarah Bessey. Sarah is the author of Jesus Feminist, an award-winning blogger at sarahbessey.com, and a passionate advocate for global women's issues. She partners with the Help One Now ministry in Haiti and lives in Abbotsford, British Columbia, Canada, with her husband, Brian, and this bio says 3 children, but you've actually got 4 now.
I do. I had a new baby just about 7 months ago.
Congratulations.
We need to update a bio.
That's right. It's the one off on Amazon under Out of Sorts is the one I was reading off of. So. Is there a difference between 3 kids and 4 kids?
Yes, I'll say that because I had my, I will say it's been a really good transition, but I had my first 3 and 4 years. And so I just kind of had this little pack of babies that has, slowly been growing up, and now they're 9 and 7 and nearly 5. And then all of a sudden we had, a brand new baby. And so it has definitely means that now you've got big kids plus sleepless nights. But at the same time, bringing home a baby to big kids has been amazing.
Oh, that's got to be the best.
It is so fun to see your big kids as nurturers. And, they're just, I feel like Maggie, that's our little baby. Her name is Maggie. I feel like she's just holding court in our house all the time. She's always got a ring of very interested brother and sisters around her at all times, just completely enchanted with everything she does. And so it's been really fun.
Well, we're here today to talk about Out of Sorts, Making Peace with an Evolving Faith. It's your newest book.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you speak to something in this book that I think a lot of us have experienced, especially those of us who became a Christian early on in our life. Can you remember when the impenetrable fortress that was your theology had the first brick knocked out of it?
Oh, that is a really good question. It's funny to me to look back, and I almost feel like sometimes I did a really good job of pretending they weren't getting knocked. It was one of those things where I believed so strongly in the structure and in, kind of the truth that was happening. Oh, by the way, the little noises you're hearing, those are all Maggie. She's here with me.
I love it. Hey,
so
Maggie.
Any looks of growling or, howling, that'll be her. I really did feel like I worked really hard for a long time to stay the same, to kind of remain in that stage of faith where everything was very literal and everything was very cause and effect. And, if I do this, then I get that, kind of thinking. And so I feel like it took me a while before I began to realize that I had all these gaping holes because I would just kind of dance harder. The more that I saw things kind of, struggling or not adding up. But I would say probably the stuff that really, leaned into it, because my background is more in the, charismatic, faith preachers, word of faith kind of movement. And so I feel like that was the point where my first cracks began to happen. Because if there's one thing that I've learned by now about faith, it's that there's not always a lot of if this, then that kind of answers.
It's tricky with faith because it's almost like conspiracy theorists, where when you present them with a piece of evidence, and to them that's just further proof that there's a cover up going on,
Exactly.
And so
yeah, that's probably alarmingly true, actually.
Yeah. Well, and I think in Christianity, when those holes come and we choose to ignore them, there's kind of this attitude of like, well, it's a badge of honor that my faith is strong enough to ignore those gaping holes. You know what I mean?
Isn't it funny? Yeah, it's almost like we get a lot of pride out of being intellectually dishonest.
Yeah, that's right. That's really well put.
And so it's a bit of a funny thing. I mean, for me, it was definitely more in the, faith and healing and signs and wonders world where I was like, wait a minute, this person that I know is the most godly and most faithful, disciple of Jesus, and yet still something has happened that doesn't line up with what we say should be happening. And then all of a sudden your brain starts to think, well, what other things have I sort of been ignoring or pretending didn't bother me or aggravate me, whether it was in my own life or in the lives of other people that I loved, or even on a more global scale. But for other people I know, who come from different backgrounds, or, it could be things like science and evolution or sexuality or politics or, whatever else kind of lines up with, justice, whatever else it is that they're kind of like, oh, wait a minute, this is actually, I need to maybe rethink some of these things. And I think that's a really good and healthy place to find yourself.
Last time you were on the show, we talked a little bit about the circumstances that surrounding your family coming to faith when you were growing up. It was a really beautiful story that I really remembered. But I'm wondering if you could talk about the type of faith that was that you were first introduced to, and that led you to have that kind of, false, like most of us had, like a false security, I guess.
Right. Well, my parents were first generation Christians, and or felt that way anyway. Obviously going back a few generations that had been there, but growing up in Canada, in the enclave of Canada where I grew up, we felt more, a bit post-Christian, right? It was my grandparents' parents who were the ones who had gone to church. And by the time it hit my parents, they were 2 generations out from having anything really to do with religion. And so when my parents, became really turn your life upside down sort of disciples of Jesus, all because of a children's record, which is, a story that I had told last time.
Yeah.
It was one of those things where we didn't know what we didn't know. We had zero clue of where we were in church history, of where we were in the larger story of Christianity. We didn't know that there were things like denominations and church calendars and, all those different types of things. And so there was a real sweet innocence about it. But over time, that innocence began to feel like ignorance. And of just, not knowing or not engaging or not learning the bigger story. And some of that, too, is even, now we live in an age of, globalization and real access to information. But back in those days, there was no internet. There was no, Christian TV, really. There was no, big Christian bookstore of all the different ways to kind of be a Christian and all the ways everybody else was doing wrong. And so... So we were able to just kind of remain quite insulated for a long time. And so, I look back on it now. I went through a season of my life where I judged that. And it felt small and one-sided of a way to know the Lord and to know what it means to be a disciple, and the things that we emphasized, maybe different than what other communities emphasize. Because I've learned by now that almost every church community emphasizes something, to the exclusion of a lot of the other aspects of following Jesus. And it's really the whole church where we get the whole picture of what that looks like. But now I feel like I've kind of circled back around where I now see a lot more of the beauty of that. And I have a lot of tenderness in my heart for the people who introduced us to Jesus and the way that we learn to worship and the starting point. And I feel like it was really, literal. It was very innocent. It was incredibly genuine and sincere and humble. And that is such a gift to be given. It's a good way to start.
Well, it reminds me of some of the things you say in the book, and I'm not going to try to pronounce the theologian's name because I would get it wrong, but the one that talked about the first naivete and then the wilderness and then the second naivete.
Raccord.
Yeah, raccord. Is that how you say it?
Mm-hmm. It's
okay.
French.
I was overthinking it then. Okay. That rings so true because that's exactly what it is. That, and for the listeners, this is the idea that we, what Sarah was describing, that first naivete that most of us have when we first become Christians, where we're not really thinking critically or asking questions, and then we start to, and we get into the wilderness. But if we keep going, we find that there is a second naivete that is more eyes wide open, sort of, and more critical, but yet believing, yet having faith.
It's incredibly nuanced and complex because it's you feel all of the same things that you felt in the beginning, the wonder and the sense of mystery and beauty and unknowingness and all those things are there and very real, but it's almost like you're there by choice. You've sorted through all of those things, and you've wrestled with your questions, your pain, your history, and sometimes you have even not always resolved them all. I think that that's part of it too. I don't think that necessarily you kind of feel born again all over again just because you got a new set of answers, right? Yeah. Often it's because you've realized the point of the questions and you're willing to live within them.
So whereas in the first naivete, we had a need to explain everything.
Right.
In the second one, we're more okay with the mystery. And maybe we have some answers that we didn't have in the first one, but more than that, we're okay with the mystery of it.
Right. And I think that even too, you begin to understand that your answers sometimes are a little bit different than they used to be. I mean, I think that a lot of times in your first naivete, even later on in the book, I talk about another study by Fowler, who talks about kind of these 6 stages. And so this would be the second and third stage, kind of being in that area of just, you think that your answers have to like tie everything up with a neat bow. That it has to be very, very obvious. You could organize it with color codes and, charts and graphs and, all those kinds of things. And on the other side, your answers maybe look like they're held with a lot more of an open hand. There's room for nuance and complexity and, like you said, mystery there. But it doesn't mean they're not answers either.
I had a professor in one of my undergrads put it this way, and he said that we're good at, kind of like you said, wrapping it up nicely in a nice neat bow. He said the way he put it was fit together nicely, but the way he put it, he said it wasn't very honest, that it wasn't very honest to the Bible or our experience very often.
I know. I feel like sometimes one of the things that Peter Enns, who's a theologian whose work has really influenced me, one of the things that he said was, we bring in, for instance, to the Bible, expectations that it's not set up to bear. And that's what I feel sometimes with our answers, in whatever area, whether it's with the Spirit or whether it's with, who Jesus is or the church, or what we think the church should be in our lives. We come to it with expectations it's not really set up, to bear or what it is or what it could be. So no, it's definitely an interesting thing. I mean, and particularly when you feel like you're in that critical distance season or you're in that wilderness season, it's disorienting, it's painful. And sometimes you stay there for a long time. There needs to be recognition for that season in our lives. And I feel like a lot of times within the church, we don't shepherd really well in that season.
There are plenty of people who, going back to the stages, the naivete and first, second, and wilderness, who go out of the first naivete into the wilderness and then don't make it out. They just stay there. And there's a real hopelessness there. I mean, if the first naivete is naive, as it says, but the wilderness isn't better. It's so hopeless and it's so dry, and there's a whole generation of people stuck there in the wilderness.
I know, and the thing is too is sometimes we could feel almost intellectually superior because we got stuck in a different stage.
That's right, and you see that a lot. You see that a lot on. Either way. It's all over Facebook.
You're stuck here. You're still not growing and evolving and moving towards something. So it's funny how we can be like, well, at least my stuckness is better than that stuckness.
Right. And I think for me, a signifier of being in the second naivete is that there's grace for the first one.
Absolutely.
For the people that are still there, and also the culture that sucked you into the first one. You know what I mean? Exactly. And I know in the book I said, just one of the things that I feel now looking back, because a big part of my own story was, kind of leaving my own tradition, leaving what I had been taught, heading out into kind of that critical distance, that weighing, that angst, and now what, and the hopelessness, and even the cynicism, and that sort of thing, leaving church altogether for, a period of 6 years entirely, and, all those different things. But then being on the other side of it and kind of returning with all this, experience and encounters, not only with God, but with the people of God, and how it really gives you new eyes to see your home and where you started. And it helps you to begin to say, you know what, I love and honor the people who introduced me to Jesus, the people who made sure I could hang on to Jesus in those seasons of my life, and the ones who are keeping me now
And sometimes that's the same group of people, even though I couldn't identify it at the time.
What do you learn about community from your experience in being out of sorts?
I feel like sometimes it's, a bit of a churchy word for just being a good friend.
Right. I love that quote. Yeah.
You know, it's, but at the same time that, an aspect of community that I really, like and appreciate, particularly within faith communities, is the opportunity to be a good friend to people that maybe I never would have encountered otherwise. We can kind of get in our little spaces in our areas where we only hang out with people who think the way we do and care about the same issues that we care about or have the same opinions. And so church community and intentional church community keeps me connected to the bigger story and reminds me that, there's more than one way to do this. There's more than one way to think and to interact and to be part of community, be part of the church, be part of worshiping God. And oftentimes I learn the most from the people who are most difficult to me or the ones whom I maybe wouldn't pick out of a crowd to be my friend.
Yeah.
And so it's been really good. I think the other thing I've learned too is that, we're not really meant for community with 500 people. That there is something really special about having a trusted and small group of people to really have for the real stuff that goes on in your life, and that authenticity and vulnerability doesn't mean that everyone, that you are able to do that with 500 people, with whatever, right? I think that there's something between saying nothing to no one and saying everything to everyone.
And that's tricky in a culture that only wants to grow. Like, you know what I mean? That we kind of got sucked into this thing that the purpose of church is to grow and, in a way of making disciples and that sort of thing. Of course we are, but to pack as many people in a building at one time.
Right.
We're kind of off course there.
Yeah. I think that's the thing. It's just, there's some large churches that I've seen that have done community better than churches of 30 people.
Sure.
But, a lot of times it's recognizing, though, that there has to be something spirit-led in the midst of it, that it's nothing you can manufacture and brand and train for, but you sure can create space for the fact that people need intimate, deep relationships that require, a lot of trust, while still recognizing that we all have sort of an inner sanctum. We're only the ones who have earned that place in our life really get access to. I think that's one of the big temptations of maybe the big growth movement is that anonymity. But I will say as well that there were seasons of my life where I needed the anonymity. I needed to be able to come and go in relative, secrecy because I wasn't ready yet. And it, a lot of the small talk and the small conversations and the showing up and kind of sneaking in and out, that created the pathway for me to then, after a while, put my hand up and say, okay, now I feel comfortable enough in this space that I can maybe step a couple, tentative tippy toes into community. But sometimes there's a lot of, small talk and chit chat that has to precede the heart to hearts.
I'm really curious how all this experience, how it affects the way that you'll teach your kids about Jesus.
Yeah, that is a good question. That is a very good one, actually. I think that's one of the things that that I find most funny in my own story is that in a lot of places I've moved and changed a lot in my opinions. I've really changed in what I believe the church is and what it's for. And I've really changed in what I believe about, the sovereignty of God and, about justice or whatever else, what healing is, what a miracle, what constitutes a miracle. So, all these different things that I have just really departed and I'm in a very different place than I was. The issue when it comes to Jesus is that I've landed really back where I started, which is quite funny to me and yet sweet because I started off, with a real intimacy with Jesus. Maybe it's because of the kind of churches that I started off in, but, Jesus was the center of everything for us. and the songs we sang, even in the mornings, when instead of calling it like a devotions or quiet time, we always called it spending time with Jesus. It was just like this presence that was a huge part of our lives. If we were wondering what to do about something, that would be the question, what do you think that Jesus wants you to do in this? What do you think that Jesus, and there was no irony to it. There was no like, marketing, what would Jesus do kind of thing. It was just, would sincerely be like, we expect you to be hearing from Jesus. And so what is it that looks like? What does that mean? And so for me, I still feel like I have returned to that sense of intimacy, that sense of centrality. I learned later on that it was really possible to be a Christian or call yourself a Christian anyway, and yet have your life look nothing like Jesus. And so for me, I feel like Jesus has been restored to being the center of everything for me, in terms of love and devotion and discipleship. And I hope that I'm having a chance to, mirror that to my children. But then that means that oftentimes I'm using a lot of the same language that I was given, in how we talk about Jesus and how we worship Jesus, what we talk about at church, what the point of it is. If you want to know what God looks like, you're supposed to look at Jesus because he's the exact representation of God for us. And I mean, all those different ways. I mean, I think that that's one thing that I really want to help my children understand, is that this isn't just another character in their Bibles. That Jesus is the exact representation of God, and all the ways that we have misunderstood and mischaracterized God over the centuries. Here is a good glimpse of what a good God looks like, and what redemption looks like, and what reconciliation looks like. And so use Jesus to understand the whole rest of it. The stories of the Old Testament and the New Testament and whatever else. But regardless, Jesus isn't just another character. Jesus is the center of it all. And so for me, that's how I explain sometimes some of those things in the Old Testament that really bug me, or, what I teach, or what I think is most important to teach. Is it more important to learn, right off the bat, all the things about Noah and the ark? Or is it more important for them to know, this story about Jesus? And so let's start here with our teaching and, our readings and all that kind of stuff.
Do you think there's a way to help our children, and even for those who don't have kids, just to help a new convert, a new Christian, skip to that second naivete?
No.
Dang it. That's what I was afraid you were going to say.
I know. Wouldn't it be nice? I mean, I think we can set our kids up with a good first start and a good foundation, but it's an important part of our growth, just like adolescence and being a teenager and being in your 20s. And, all those things are important parts of your growth. And even though it's painful at the time when your kids are pushing back against your rules or pushing back against the things that you have taught them, if you can make space for that and love them well in the midst of those changes, you'll find you'll get to be a part of that transformation and change, and you'll be the first person that they turn to on the other side. And the other thing that I've discovered, one thing my parents did really, really well for me, now being at this stage where I have older children, and I look back and they changed with me. You know what? They did. They went through their own transformations, things that I thought my dad and my mom would never change their opinions on. They, through a lot of good conversations and time and giving each other a lot of grace, even in the places where they still think I'm wrong, or they think I've landed somewhere where they didn't want me to land, we're still able to have a really good and rich, robust conversations, acceptance of each other's way of thinking, an understanding of why we're where we're at. And it's been a real blessing to our relationship, because I feel like they trust me. And they trust even where I have led them sometimes.
I have a really similar experience with my parents too. That's really meaningful to have a parent, whether you're the parent of the child, to in a way say, look, you're in this stage now, but there's going to be a time where the wilderness is going to come, and that's okay. That you're not, it doesn't mean that you're bad, or that you don't have enough faith, or you don't love Jesus enough, but that's going to come.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of us were blindsided by the wilderness, and we felt lonely in the wilderness.
I think so. I think one of the things that my parents, because, we've talked about it a few times, they really thought that Jesus would fix that for them. because they were first generation Christians. They were like, great, now we're set. We've got the answer. There's never going to be any changes. And so I think that it was as much a learning curve for them that you still did need to wrestle and sort and wonder and wander a bit. And then they began to see that God was just as much present and faithful in that season as, God has ever been present and faithful in our certainties. So that there can be a presence there in the questions. I feel like one of the things that we can do as parents, that I've seen good parents do, is coming into it with a realization of humility, and from a position of humility instead of a position of authority and certainty. That's one of the things that I think the second nativity gives you is humility. Because you realize that you've sorted through all of your questions and your, wonderings. And even though you've landed on some answers, I'm under no illusions that I'm in the final place in my life. I know that there will be other things where I will go through another season of critical distance. It's not a one and done sort of thing. And so if I'm going through that and I'm, in the stage of life that I'm in, why in the world would I think that my 13-year-old or my 20-year-old or my 30-year-old would not be doing the same thing? We are all being transformed continually in response to the unchanging Christ as we learn and as we grow. I think it just means we're paying attention.
And I think for me, I've come to the realization that it's not a 3-step process of naivete, critical distance, and then the better naivete. And in fact, I feel like sometimes in a 24-hour period, I go through all 3.
Isn't that the truth? It's so funny how much we want our formulas, and even more how much we want to be like, and done, and never have to do it again.
Yeah. We want to reach that destination and then call it a day.
I know. What's funny, though, is that at the time it feels like a tremendous amount of angst, and you're frustrated that you're in this place again. You're frustrated that you're in a place of, wondering and questions, and this doesn't fit anymore, and this thing that used to work doesn't work for me anymore. But then you get on the other side of it, and you look back, and you're so thankful. I look back on the woman that I was, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, even 5 years ago, 3 years ago, and I'm just so thankful for those seasons of sifting and change, even though they were painful, and there was often some grief that was attendant to it. I'm just so thankful for that. That to me is a mercy from God that we get a chance to walk through those times, because we end up in such a more, full and whole version of not only ourselves, but with clearer eyes to see Jesus. Just the gift of being able to learn and grow and change. I'm just so thankful that that's part of the hope of the gospel, is I don't have to die the same person I am today.
Sarah, it's been so good talking with you. Thank you again for coming on the show. It's just a fantastic book once again.
Oh, thank you so much, Shane. I appreciate it. I always enjoy our chats.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Seminary Dropout. Remember, you can find all the show notes for this show and all shows at shaneblackshear.com. Oh, and hey, have you ever thought about starting your very own podcast? I bet you have. And I think you should do it. In fact, I've created a course just for you to teach you everything that I've learned over the last couple of years producing Seminary Dropout. So if you're interested in podcasting and want to learn how, go check out my course. You can go there by typing in podcastingforeveryone.org. And you can get a special discount by typing in the discount code Seminary Dropout, all one word. That'll give you 25% off. So go check it out. If you have any questions, let me know. Okay. Thanks to those that left ratings and reviews on iTunes this week. Remember, that keeps the show front and center. Also, remember, you can find me on Twitter at beardonabike. That's at beardonabike. Also, I'm on Facebook, facebook.com/ShaneBlackshear123. And remember that Seminary Dropout is listener supported. You can visit supportseminarydropout.com and press Become a Patron. Remember, this music you're listening to right now is by D.L. Rossi. You can find him online on iTunes and at dlrossi.com. All right, thanks again for joining me for another episode of Seminary Dropout. Stay tuned for next week's episode. Love you. Take care.
But